This woman vanished 3 times and she's seemingly now gone missing for good. It was midday on the 16th of December 2008 in southern Manhattan, New York. Some men were working on a ferry deck when they noticed something extremely strange in the water. There was what looked like a woman in the water floating face down. They immediately sprang into action and rescued her from the water. She gasped for air and they were stunned that she was still alive. Her name was Hannah Up. She was a 23-year-old Spanish teacher who'd gone missing 3 weeks prior. They rushed her to hospital where she needed urgent treatment for hypothermia and severe sunburn. She told staff that the last thing she remembered was going out for a run. She was diagnosed with a condition called dissociative fugue. It's defined as a psychological state where a person loses awareness of their identity and engages in some form of unexpected travel. Hannah was obviously frightened by the incident but tried to carry on her life as normal. 5 years later, though, she would suffer the same fate. It was September 2013. She worked as a teaching assistant at that point in Maryland when her phone and purse were found abandoned on a path. Her mum reported her missing and she remained missing for 2 days when she suddenly remembered who she was while she was in a creek. She went up to a member of the public and asked them if she could use their phone to call her mum. Then the following year she moved to St. Thomas in the Caribbean. On the 14th of September, she left a note stating that she was off for a swim before going to work, but she never turned up at work. She never called anyone to let them know what she was doing or if her plans had changed, and her clothing and belongings were found just abandoned on a beach. It's now 7 years since she last vanished, but her family refuses to give up hope. So what do you think? Where has she ended up? Is she still alive? Let me know in the comments.
Kids Who Are Geniuses, Part 1. Firstly, meet Accurate Jaswal, and by the age of 7, he became the youngest surgeon in the world when he performed a live surgery on a 6-year-old patient successfully. Accurate was also accepted into medical school at the age of 11 and has an IQ of 146. Next, when Kim Young was 3 years old, he was able to solve algebra problems, and at the age of 4, he was fluent in 4 different languages. But that's not it, because at the age of 8, he was invited to work for NASA, and at 16 years old, he left NASA, and it said he has an IQ of 210. Finally, these paintings that you see are not done by an adult, but a child. His name is Edmund Thomas Clint, and he created 25,000 paintings in his lifetime until he unfortunately passed away at the young age of just 7 years old. But his artwork will live forever.
I want to talk about one of the worst videos I've seen on the internet, which is of this woman, Amy, going through the McKamey Manor haunted house. Because while the video is bad, there's one specific part that I think people really need to know about. So some background for people that aren't familiar. McKamey Manor is a haunted house run by Russ McKamey, and it's essentially just a torture chamber. People who go to this haunted house have teeth ripped out without Novocaine, they get buried alive, they even have to eat their own throw up. It's horrible. And recently, the owner, Russ, was just arrested for attempting to kill a woman twice, which I covered in the most recent episode of my podcast, Heart Starts Pounding. But while I was doing research for that episode, I came upon this video of Amy going through the experience. And the whole thing was recorded and put up on the internet, except for one part, and that's the part I want to talk about. During the experience, Amy's told that 2 brothers are going to come rough her up, but then the screen goes black and it just says, "I cannot show you what takes place," referring to what happened to Amy when the brothers showed up. And the next time we see Amy, she's sitting in this freezer and her spirit looks completely broken, like something bad just happened, but we weren't able to see what occurred. Amy later did an interview saying that when the brothers showed up, she was actually tortured really badly and used the safe word, but was not allowed to end the experience. And that to me is the worst part of McKamey Manor, because even though McKamey Manor is just torture, they say that there's a safe word you can use to end the experience. But as I was doing research for this episode, I kept coming across stories of people who said they used the safe word and were not allowed to stop. They had to keep going. I get more into it in this episode, which I think is worth listening to if you're curious about McKamey Manor and what actually happens there. But yeah, I would say if you're interested in going to this place, you absolutely shouldn't, especially if you're a woman.
A 23-year-old Florida woman was posing as a 14-year-old girl to meet up with little boys. This is 23-year-old Alyssa Ann Zinger. She was first arrested in November for at least 30 acts with a middle school boy, and then sending explicit Snapchats to many more middle schoolers. Her persona was a 14-year-old homeschooled girl. She communicated with all of her victims through Snapchat. She got hit with a ton of charges, mainly CP charges, and that's on top of assault charges. Interestingly enough, her and the victim that she was with got caught shoplifting at Nordstrom in July. She lied to the police about her identity. She was born in 2001. She said she was born in 2009 to them, but they had been investigating her for over a year now. They found out she had been lying after reviewing her school and employment records and contacted her employer at Publix in Tampa. Then, 3 months later after that, a victim came forward about Alyssa Zinger's crimes. If convicted, she faces 146 years, so basically life in prison. And I believe she has 7 different charges against her with 12 counts. If you're from Tampa, let me know if you heard about this. I'm from Tampa. I'm just hearing about this. I believe she was arrested last week, so makes sense. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, these videos are for informational purposes only.
Now this video has got the internet going crazy because a guy in Melbourne, Australia is quite literally claiming that his dog was playing with a ghost. And after watching this, I bloody believe him. Now he insists that his backyard is fully secured and locked by a high fence where there is no way for another dog to get in. He also said that he ran outside to check if he hadn't lost the plot and that the ghost dog was nowhere to be seen. And if this video hasn't got you contemplating life, another video which has scarred me for life is this bastard. Now keep your eyes on the collar of the black dog on the right. So as you can see, the 2 dogs are just barking and barking, and then suddenly out of nowhere, for some reason, they just go completely quiet. A few seconds later, the black dog then randomly jerks backwards into the side of the crate and its collar comes off of its own accord.
This woman was caught on camera doing something deeply disturbing to win a chess match. Earlier this year, Russian pro chess player Amina Abakarova apparently needed a way to knock her opponent out of a tournament. So she decided to go to the extreme and poison the woman, 30-year-old Ume Osmanova, in what's being treated as an assassination attempt. Amina poured mercury from a thermometer onto the victim's chessboard before her next match and smeared it all over her side of the board with one of the pieces. Osmanova said she began feeling unwell during her match 30 minutes later, complaining of sudden severe nausea and dizziness, prompting an immediate call for medical assistance. After the security footage was reviewed by authorities, Amina had no choice but to confess to the murder attempt. Osmanova ended up making a full recovery, as the attacker was banned from future chess competitions and stripped of her previous titles. Abakarova now potentially faces several years in Russian prison for the senseless attack.
Disturbing facts that will ruin your life. Coconuts kill more people than sharks every year. Same with cows. Vending machines are actually twice as likely to kill you than a shark is. France was still executing people via guillotine when the first Star Wars film came out. There are more fake flamingos in the world than real ones. There are more tigers in Texas than the rest of the world. There's enough iron in your body to make a 3-inch nail. Beethoven and George Washington were alive at the same time. In fact, George Washington was in his 40s when Beethoven was born. There are more stars in space than there are grains of sand on every beach on Earth. It rains diamonds on Saturn and Jupiter. A buttload is an actual unit of measurement, equivalent to 126 gallons. Hit the plus sign if you want to learn more facts.
This is a true horrifying story of a haunted house in Jumeirah 1. This story was submitted by a family, a mom, a dad, and 3 daughters. The story happened in 2016. Jumeirah 1 is an old area in Dubai. Many houses there are old, though they are very expensive, since they're just a 5-minute walk from the beach. This family moved in a new house with a 1-year lease contract. After organizing furniture, they moved in and the 3 daughters picked the rooms they wanted. On the 3rd night, the youngest daughter, aged 10, came to her sisters crying, saying she doesn't want to sleep in her room anymore. When they asked her why, she didn't want to speak. She then slept with them in another room that night. On the 4th night, she comes back at 1 a.m. crying again, but this time, She seemed petrified. She was shivering, begging not to sleep in her bedroom. One of the sisters gets up and walks towards her room. She bends over to get a peek, while the two other sisters were staring at her from behind. This sister got paralyzed from waist up. She wanted to scream for help, but she was not able to move a muscle. And her sisters behind her didn't know that she was struggling. She was frozen in her spot. She fell down a few seconds later, and she runs to wake up her parents. She was shouting intensely, explaining what just happened. The father gets up and gently goes inside that bedroom, as if someone in there was calling him. He goes in and shockingly closes the door behind him. It was a terrifying moment of silence, as the whole family waited for the father outside that door. A minute felt like an hour. He comes out with an agitated face and says, "All of you should leave this house now." The mother knew exactly what her husband was going through. She acted normal. She took her daughters and left the house. Never try fixing a situation like this if you're angry. This is the latest update. The father is fine. The daughters are okay. The whole family is safe and happy in a new home. But just to show you how haunted this house is, in 2018, the landlord decided to demolish and rebuild this house. They were 2 weeks behind schedule because 13 deconstructing equipment were damaged during the process.
Broke up with her, so she sprayed him with acid. This is 29-year-old Mark Van Dongen. He attended the University of Bristol, and once he graduated, he started working as an engineer. In 2010, Mark joined a dating website, and there he met Berlina Wallace, who was 20 years older than him, and they started a relationship. In 2015, Mark ended the relationship with Berlina. She was physically abusing him, and it was getting way out of hand. Mark had scratches all over his body from Berlina, and even one night when he was asleep, she poured boiling water all over him. In addition to that, Berlina would purposely harm herself to blackmail Mark, and she told him that if he were to ever leave her, she would go straight to the police and tell them that her injuries were caused by Mark. Once the breakup between Mark and Berlina was official, he moved on with his life and even met another girl, but Berlina was not able to let him go that easily. The next month, Mark contacted the police that his ex-girlfriend was harassing him and his partner, and not only that, but she was threatening to take her own life if he would not get back together with her. Although police contacted Berlina about her behavior, this did not stop her, and at this point, Mark was telling his father that he was scared for his life. On September 22nd, Mark would make a 911 call, and his screams would wake up his whole neighborhood. Those neighbors looked outside and they could see Mark running and screaming in his underwear, and they thought this was some kind of joke, but it wasn't. As those neighbors got closer to Mark to find out what was going on, they realized that his skin was melting. The night before, Mark ended up visiting Berlina in her apartment to tell her that the relationship was over, and for some reason, he ended up spending the night. While Mark was asleep, Berlina got up, she went to the kitchen and poured sulfuric acid into a cup. She took that cup to the bedroom where Mark was sleeping. She woke him up and started laughing and said, "If I can't have you, then no one can." Berlina then threw the cup in Mark's face. Once police and paramedics arrived at the scene, Mark was found in a horrible state. Mark was foaming through his mouth and he had some serious burns on his face, chest, arms, shoulders, and legs. Mark was taken in an ambulance to the emergency room, and while he was talking to the paramedics, he told them that he couldn't see, and when they checked his eyes, they noticed that one of his irises had dissolved. Mark was able to tell authorities that his ex-girlfriend Berlina caused all of this, so when they went to arrest her in her apartment, she was just sitting quietly on her couch. Mark was in intensive care for months, and he could only breathe with a ventilator. As time went on, Mark was not doing so well, and he felt like the only way for him to be relieved from this pain was for them to just end his life. On January 2nd of 2017, Mark spent his last moments with his father, and as requested, he stopped breathing that same night. As for Berlina, she was acquitted of murder and manslaughter, and she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years.
This husband was on TV pleading for his wife to come home, but was she ever really missing at all? On November 2nd, 2016, 39-year-old Sherri Papini sent her husband Keith a text message asking if he would be home for lunch. Keith responded by saying no, and that was it. Later that day, Keith arrived home and was surprised to find it empty. His wife Sherri was nowhere to be found. He then immediately began to track down Sherri's cell phone, and it actually pinged less than a mile away from the family's home. Keith immediately ran to this location, and that's when he found Sherri's cell phone, her earbuds, and strands of her hair. He immediately reported his wife as missing, and the search for Sherri began. Now, this search was intense. Detectives spoke to so many people, and the media picked up on the case right away. Everyone's main theory was that Sherri had been abducted. Weeks passed without any answers until November 24th, 2016. This is when Sherri was found on the side of the road. People just couldn't believe that Sherri had been found and that she had been found alive. Everyone was just so happy to have Sherri back. However, that happiness was short-lived because the truth of what happened to Sherri was eventually revealed. This true crime documentary series follows a 6-year journey from Sherri's disappearance to her discovery to finding the truth and all the effects it had on communities across the country. If you want to hear more about this shocking story, make sure to check out Perfect Wife: The Mysterious Disappearance of Sherri Papini, out on Hulu June 20th.
The soldier lost his life for dating a transgender woman. On July 6 of 1999, a group of soldiers who were stationed at Fort Campbell Army Base in Kentucky drove to downtown Nashville to go to a transgender club/bar called The Connection. One of the soldiers, 21-year-old Barry Winchell, met a transgender dancer, Calpurnia Adams, at the club. The two hit it off, exchanged numbers, and started dating. One of the soldiers, Justin Fisher, started gossiping with other soldiers that Barry was dating a transgender woman. With this information, the soldiers were taunting, teasing, and calling Barry derogatory and vulgar names. Barry reported this to his superiors, but they basically just brushed it off. By the 4th of July weekend, Barry was just getting fed up with everything. Barry and another soldier named Calvin Glover end up getting into a physical altercation. Barry ends up winning that altercation, and the other soldiers are now making fun of Calvin for losing the fight, and he knew that he had something to prove to those soldiers. Calvin went to Justin's locker and retrieved a baseball bat, and while Barry was asleep, he struck him in the head and neck multiple times. Barry was transported to Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, where he died from massive head injuries. Calvin was arrested and accepted a plea deal for murder. Calvin claimed that he didn't mean to unalive Barry, that he must have just been too drunk. Justin was also arrested and sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. As for Calvin, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Justin was released on October of 2006, and Calvin was released on parole on August 27th of 2020.
This teacher had with her 15-year-old student. It was the year 2003, and Karen Louise Ellis was a 36-year-old mother of 3 living in Melbourne, Australia with her husband, Stephen. She was a PE teacher at her local high school, and her husband would have to travel a lot for work, which meant that she would often be left home alone with the children. To the outside world, Karen's life seemed perfect. However, she claims that things weren't perfect and that she was actually very lonely. She didn't like that her husband had to travel so much for work, she felt neglected, and she was seeking some type of attention. Unfortunately, she decided that the person that was going to give her this affection and this type of attention was her 15-year-old student, Ben. Ben was one of her PE students, and the two of them would spend a lot of time together on the basketball courts. Ben would make some flirtatious comments towards Karen, and Karen enjoyed the attention. Now, it's not uncommon for students to have a crush on their teachers. Like, it's somewhat normal, but it's what those teachers do with that attention and with those crushes that matters. Instead of putting a stop to this flirting, Karen flirted back. Got to the point where Karen was actually looking forward to go to work, not because she enjoyed teaching or wanted to do her job, job, but because she looked forward to seeing Ben. She said that Ben wasn't like other 15-year-old boys, that he wasn't on his skateboard, he wasn't giggling, he wasn't acting stupid, that he was actually very mature for his age, and that sometimes he was even more mature than she was. At first, they were only flirting with each other, but then things escalated. One day, while they were on the basketball courts, Ben leaned in for a kiss, and Karen accepted. From there, the two of them would meet at the basketball courts, drive over to Karen's home, and then there they would have. According to phone records, Karen sent Ben almost 500 text messages, and the two of them exchanged about 123 voice messages. So this was very intense. This went on for the next 6 weeks until they were finally caught. Now, the way that they were caught was that one day while they were doing their usual routine of meeting on the basketball courts and then heading over to Karen's home, Ben's mother actually spotted them leaving. And she said that this didn't look like a teacher doing a favor by driving her student home, that they looked like they were husband and wife. The whole situation just felt off, so Ben's mom decided to call the police and report Karen's abuse. Karen was taken into police custody, and what she told police was shocking. Okay, go to part 2.
The FBI is convinced that this man's strange coded letter could be the key to solving his murder. Ricky McCormick was born on June 14th of 1958, and from the time he was very young, his family believed that he had some mental disabilities. He would work with therapists, and the therapist would say that it was almost like he had a brick wall in his head that he just couldn't get through. Ricky would drop out of high school, and when he did drop out of high school, he could barely read or write. His family said that he would often scribble, but that it wasn't like coherent scribbling. His cousin also said that talking to him was like he was in another world, and many people believe that he might have suffered from schizophrenia. Ricky would work odd jobs here and there, just whatever he could find, and he also lived off his disability checks because of his heart issues, and that's essentially how he made money. But in 1992, he got into some legal trouble because it came to light that he had 2 children with a girl that was 14 years old. He would spend 13 months in prison out of his 4-year sentence and then be released from jail. But even after getting out, he was still plagued with troubles. He started working a graveyard shift at this Amoco station in St. Louis. 2 brothers owned this Amoco station, and it was Juma and Bala Hamdallah, and I'm very sorry, I probably said those names wrong, but they were the 2 brothers that owned this Amoco station, and they were known to be not very nice. And Ricky's behavior started getting very strange when he worked for these 2 men. He would often make mysterious trips to Florida. Now, Ricky was seeing a girl while he was at this Amoco station, and she said that she really believed that Ricky was smuggling illegal substances to Florida for the 2 brothers. She also said that Ricky would act very scared around this situation, like he was scared of something. But things would only get worse in 1999. Between June 22nd and June 25th, Ricky would go to 2 hospitals. One turned him away and the other did treat him. He was having chest pains and was just acting erratically. Then on June 27th of 1999, Ricky was last seen at the Amoco station where he worked, and then he just disappears. We'll get into more in part 2 along with his mysterious notes. It'll be linked down in the comments.